The BBC over there.
Thank you, Secretary General. Jonathan Marcus from the BBC. You say you're looking at the option of national plans. This is clearly something that the Americans believe very strongly in, that there must be timetables and commitments on paper that people can be held to. Do you actually assume that come the May summit there will be firm agreement on these national plans? And secondly, on the counter-terror, obviously there's going to be a great vacuum in Iraq as and when Mosul finally falls. Do you foresee a significant NATO role in helping to stabilize post-war Iraq?
We are now working on the national plans, and it's a bit too early to say what will be the decision in May. But that is one proposal that is now on the table, and we're looking into how we can develop national plans to become a tool to implement what we agreed in 2014. And the plans, as I see them, can address in a way the three pillars, both the need for more spending, investments in defense, but also the need to address the capabilities we need, and also the need to have commitments and contributions from all allies to NATO operations, missions, and different other activities. The important thing is that we all agree on the importance of what we decided in 2014, meaning that we have to stop the cuts, gradually increase defense spending, and then move towards spending 2% of GDP on defense. And the good news is that we have already started to implement that pledge. Because in 2015, the first year after the decision was taken, we actually stopped the cuts. After many years of decline in defense spending across Europe and Canada, we had a small increase in defense spending in 2015. Then in 2016, we had a significant increase of 3.8% in real terms, or $10 billion. And this is the first time in many years we see this kind of increase in defense spending across Europe and Canada. So we have started to move in the right direction. We have some allies which are now able to announce that they will reach the 2% target this year. Romania announced that they will reach the 2% target this year. Lithuania and Latvia said that they will reach it next year, and other allies are following. So we are moving in the right direction. Then on Iraq, well, NATO is already training Iraqi officers. We have done that for some time in Jordan, and we have started a modest but scalable training activity in Iraq this year. And today I announced that we will step up our efforts in Iraq with training medical personnel, and also to help maintain armored vehicles and tanks in Iraq. And we will then examine before May and look into what more we can agree by May. My main message on these issues is that I think that the best way to fight terrorism is to build local capacity, defense institutions, security institutions, but also, of course, train local forces.
Washington Post.
Hi, Michael Birnbaum from the Washington Post. The German Foreign Minister, Sigmar Gabriel, today said that, or he made the point that the NATO spending guidelines are not binding. And he said that for Germany to live up to that 2% pledge would be totally unrealistic. Is the Trump administration misinterpreting the 2014 pledges, and how are you going to bridge the gap between the American and German positions?
All allies understand and accept the need for fair burden sharing and respect the decision we made in 2014. And Germany has started to increase. After years of decline in German defense spending, we have seen now an increase, and actually a significant increase, in German defense spending in 2016. And they also announced further increases in German defense spending. So Germany has started to move in the right direction, and that makes a difference because the German economy is so big compared to also the biggest economy in Europe. And then we are now looking into how we can develop tools to make sure that we deliver, that we implement, and that's exactly why we now are looking into the proposal of developing individual national plans for all allies. The national plans may vary a bit. I don't think we have exactly the same kind of national plans for all allies, because some allies have enacted in law that they will spend 2%. Other allies will not do that, but they may, for instance, have a cross-party agreement in the parliament on increased defense spending. Exactly how this will be done is something we are now working on. But the important thing for me is that all allies accept and understand and respect the decision we made in 2014, and we have started to implement, and Germany has also started to increase defense spending.
Okay. Wall Street Journal, just behind you.
On the counterterrorism, Secretary of State Tillerson talked about, he raised the issue of the cyber domain and perhaps suggesting that NATO could do more to counter terrorism in cyber. You made the Iraq announcement. I wonder what other areas you'll be looking at between now and in May for increasing NATO's counterterrorism efforts, and whether that does include the cyber domain.
We are increasing and strengthening our cyber defenses to be able to protect us against many different kinds of cyber attacks, also as part of a response to terrorism. And therefore we have strengthened our cyber defenses, both and strengthened our ability to defend NATO networks. And sometimes we use NATO networks in our operations against terrorism. For instance, to be able to protect our networks in Afghanistan is of great importance for our operation in Afghanistan, which is a key contribution of NATO to the fight against terrorism. Then we are, of course, working with nations to how to help them to improve their cyber networks or to defend their cyber networks. We have a center of excellence. We have established cyber as we are in the process of establishing cyber as a military domain. So we have sea, land, air and sea and cyber as military domains. And all of this is, of course, contributing to, what I say, the general improvement of our cyber defenses, which is relevant also for the fight against terrorism. So we are examining different tools, including cyber, on how we can do even more when it comes to contributing to the fight against terrorism. We will work on different issues. Cyber is one, but also special operation forces. NATO has a headquarters, special operation forces headquarters, and they do some training already. They have some deployable training teams. The issue is whether we can do more of that in stepping up our efforts to provide support for the fight against terrorism.
CBS in the second row. Here, second row.
I'm Elizabeth Palmer with CBS. Can you tell us whether there is any sort of a sanction for countries that don't come up with a plan in May? What's your or else, in other words, if it just doesn't happen, if there are persistent shirkers? And secondly, can you tell us where the discussions are with Russia on implementing the Minsk Accords?
The meeting we had today was important because it demonstrated transatlantic unity. And it was important because it was a meeting in a series of meetings where the new US administration has come to Europe and committed expressed strong commitment to NATO, to the transatlantic bond, but also where European allies and Canada has committed to more investments in our shared security, increased defense spending. And that was reiterated at the meeting today. And we all agree that we have to implement the decision we made in 2014. So that's the important message from this meeting. And this is not only words, but also in deeds, because allies have actually started to increase defense spending. 10 billion in 1 year, 2016, is a significant step in the right direction. Then we are working on the plans. So it's a bit too early to say exactly how they will be designed. and we haven't made any final decision on them, but that's one of the proposals for not changing the decision we made in 2014, but developing a tool to implement what we made, the decision we made in 2014. So the plans is not changing the decision, the plans are only a tool to implement the decision in 2014. And therefore, the message is that plans will help us, but the decision stands. And exactly how the plans will look like, it's too early to say, because we will work on them, and then I will hope that we will have an agreement by May, so we can have a clear decision by May on the national plans. Russia and Minsk. So first of all, we had a very good discussion on Russia because NATO allies agree on what we call the dual track approach, meaning we need a strong NATO, we need credible deterrence and defense as a platform for engaging with Russia in a political dialogue. And that's exactly what we are doing now. We have implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War. We have tripled the size of the NATO response force. We have started to deploy 4 battle groups to Poland and the Baltic countries. We have established 8 new headquarters in the eastern part of the alliance, and we are increasing defense spending. So we are delivering on the deterrence and defense, the strength pillar. But at the same time, we have been able to convene 4 meetings of the NATO-Russia Council, starting last summer, after 2 years without any meetings. And of course, that dialogue is not easy. That dialogue is very often very difficult. For instance, yesterday we had a meeting on the NATO-Russia Council where we discussed Ukraine. And that was a difficult discussion. But I think it is important that we sit around the same table, exchange views and arguments also on the issues, or especially on the issues where we disagree, like, for instance, Ukraine. We have been able to make some progress on what we call transparency, predictability, risk reduction. For instance, we are addressing now with experts measures to improve air safety in the Baltic region. There was a meeting recently in Finland, and I welcome the work which is now ongoing on addressing air safety in the Baltic region. On Ukraine, the main message is that the only way to a peaceful solution is the full implementation of the Minsk agreements. And that has to start with a ceasefire which is respected. And the way to make sure that the ceasefire is respected is to make sure that the international monitors are allowed access to the area, unhindered, safe access. So they can monitor the ceasefire and make sure that the heavy weapons are withdrawn. NATO continues to provide strong support to Ukraine. Allies announced more support during the meeting today. We stand in solidarity with Ukraine. A sovereign, democratic, prosperous Ukraine is of course good for the people of Ukraine, but is also good for all NATO allies because this is about our values, protecting them in Europe, in Ukraine.
Second row.
Markus Becker, Der Spiegel in Germany. The German Minister Gabriel said that at the core of the conflict between the United States and Germany is not the issue of defense spending alone, but the question if the security idea should be narrowed down to defense spending. And he said that maybe even things like expenditures for refugees should be taken into account because many refugees come from countries where military interventions have failed. So is there any discussion in NATO about taking such things like development or humanitarian aid into account when talking about burden sharing for security on a broader scale?
Diplomacy, development aid, economic cooperation, all that can be important to try to help stabilize the region. And therefore, we need many different tools. And there are international targets, guidelines for instance, development aid, 0.7% of GDP. And then we have a NATO agreement on moving towards spending 2% of GDP on defense. But that's 2 different things, even if both are important. And we have some allies, for instance, the United Kingdom, they meet both the 0.7% target of GDP for development aid and spending 2% on defense. So it's possible to do both. And I welcome the fact that the United Kingdom actually is able to do that. But there's no way we can say that in a way, for instance, the United Kingdom, which then meets the development aid target, 0.7%, they are not in a way saying that then we don't have to spend 2% on defense. The United Kingdom actually says that we spend 2% on defense, which we have agreed to in NATO, and we spend 0.7% on development aid, as we agreed to in the UN. And there are different, we need many different tools to stabilize our neighborhood. In Afghanistan, for instance, we have NATO allies, together with the European Union and the UN, are funding many different kinds of development programs. That is important. But there is no way we can implement those development programs without security, without safety, and without training, assisting, advising the Afghan security forces. So it's not either development or security. It is development and security, and the foundation for development is that you have to have peace and security as the platform.
Okay, we'll go to the front row.
Thank you. Jürgen Mikhailov, Ukrainian online edition, lb.ua. So, when may we expect the North Atlantic Council in Ukraine? And could you please comment on General Scaparotti's statement concerning providing lethal weapons to Ukraine? Thank you.
We are grateful because we are invited, or the North Atlantic Council is invited to Ukraine, and we are looking into the possibility to find time for that. But I am not able to provide you with any exact dates. I have visited Ukraine myself. Many NATO allies have visited Ukraine many times, but we have not been able so far to find an exact date for a visit of the whole North Atlantic Council, but we are looking into and try to find a date. NATO and NATO allies provide support to Ukraine in many different ways. We help Ukraine with implementing reforms. To fight corruption is important because a modern, well-functioning Ukraine is also something that contributes to a more resilient Ukraine and makes Ukraine less vulnerable to outside interference. So when NATO allies and NATO help Ukraine with implementing reforms, with fighting corruption, with modernizing the security sector, that's also important for the security of Ukraine. We train, we help with command and control, we help with many different trust funds in different areas. But NATO as an alliance do not possess weapons or equipment. That is something which is delivered by nations, not by NATO, and therefore it's not for NATO to make decisions on the delivery of specific equipment.
Okay, Europa Press.
Thank you, Secretary General. You've mentioned the mobile teams when you were talking about the Special Ops HQ. Would these special mobile teams, would they be used for capacity building, or are we talking for a specific role in the stabilization on Iraq, or even possibly in the fight against terrorism, like counter-terrorism proper, if allies agree to it in May? Thank you.
The mobile teams are already used to train and develop special operation forces in different countries in our neighborhood. They have been used in Tunisia. I think we've used them in Jordan. I think we also trained special operation forces, advised special operation forces in several other countries in the region. They have not been used in Afghanistan. In Iraq. But I said that the possible use of our Special Operation Forces headquarters and the mobile training teams is one of the different options we are now looking into when we are looking into what more we can do in general to fight terrorism. Yeah.
And last question, lady over there. No.
Our Secretary General, Anna Vedensky from our Brussels Diplomatic. You like to repeat always that alliance is a union of values, of democracies. So what alliance has done to liberate our colleagues in Turkey, because now already almost 200 journalists there are behind the bars?
NATO is based on some core values: democracy, the rule of law, individual liberties. And I have stated that many times, and I personally attach great importance to those values. At the same time, we have to understand that Turkey is the ally most affected by the turmoil, the violence in Iraq, Syria. They have suffered many, many terrorist attacks, and they suffered a coup attempt where several hundred people were killed, and the parliament building was bombed while parliamentarians were inside the building. So of course Turkey has the right to defend itself, and it has the right to prosecute those behind the failed coup attempt. But this has to be conducted in a way which is in accordance with the rule of law. That is something I have stated several times. And I have also welcomed that there is established contact between the Council of Europe and Turkey, because it is the Council of Europe, which is the European body where Turkey is member, that has the tools and the responsibility for the European Human Rights Convention. And therefore I welcome that there is direct contact between the Council of Europe and Turkey addressing these issues.
Last but not least, CNN, second row.
So our question is, you have had a few hours with U.S. Secretary Tillerson. What other questions remain?
Sorry, I didn't fully understand. Other questions than defense spending, or?
When you met U.S. Secretary, what kind of other questions remain?
Yeah. So we addressed in the meeting today, which we had 3 sessions, and we addressed many different issues. But the main topics was in the first session was burden sharing, defense spending, the transatlantic unity. And the United States, Secretary Tillerson expressed a strong commitment to NATO, to the transatlantic bond, but he also expressed a strong position from the United States on the importance of fair burden sharing. And let me add that I believe it's very important to remember that fair burden sharing or increased defense spending across Europe and Canada is not just something we have to do to please the United States. It's not just about pleasing the United States. It is about investing in our own security, in the security of Europe, because Europe is very close to the turmoil, the violence in North Africa, the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, and we are close to a more assertive Russia. But that was the main message, or one of the 2 main messages in the first session, was to address transatlantic bond burden sharing. And we also addressed and discussed what more NATO can do to fight terrorism, especially how we can prevent. Prevention is better than intervention, and how we can build local capacity. Instead of deploying large number of our own troops in big combat operations, it is about training local forces, building local capacity, enabling them to stabilize their own country and to fight terrorism themselves, as we have done, for instance, in Afghanistan for many years. Then we discussed Russia, and the main message there is defense and dialogue, and also to work with partners like Sweden, Finland, the European Union, and others. And then we had the meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Commission, where we expressed strong solidarity, the territorial integrity, the sovereignty of Ukraine. So that sums up the whole meeting, and that ends this press conference. Thank you so much.
Wishing you a good weekend. Thank you.